Hello and welcome. This is The Other View, and I am Omar Saleh. In this video, I wanted to cover yet another one of my favorite concepts, risk. And I had one hell of a conundrum and a dilemma because risk is a fairly wide subject, and would it be able to fit in one video or not? But I decided it can, and I will try and fit it at a very high level in that, and then if there is a lot of interest in it, then we would probably go and do a longer version of a sort of a mini podcast on it, or question and answer as well in the future. Risk is one of those other terms that is very much used and abused. It has a history in a number of areas, and its history changes and varies by industry and by markets, as well as of course the companies that operate in those industries and markets. So it is so difficult to know where to start with defining risk, and should we call it business risk or enterprise risk or personal risk or just risk as such. So I'm going to use those terms interchangeably, whether it's business risk, enterprise risk, ERM, enterprise risk management, or business risk management, BRM, and so on, or risk management, RM as a whole. So for the sake of this video, I'll just mean the same thing by all of them, and I'm going to try and use my own definitions and my own experiences of those definitions, and what are the major areas of risks that you need to be aware of overall before you decide about how to start your own journey with risk and business risk as a whole. Because we have almost all companies have, and corporations and small and medium-sized businesses, even us as individuals, our own perception of what is a risk. Risk started off for a lot of people, especially in the technology industry, in the old days, by calling it disaster recovery. A lot of people said, "Oh, what if a disaster happens? Then how do we recover?" And they started devising disaster recovery plans, and that evolved in a lot of companies and industries into becoming, "Oh, what is a disaster? It's a risk," and so on. And then how do we manage that disaster when it happens? Of course, that's a long time ago, and complexity, and we learned a lot in during that period. So not people don't necessarily agree completely on the definition of risk, but I'm going to use my own perception and my own experience in defining it. What is a risk? My own definition says a risk is any event or occurrence that happens in your organization or in your life, that stops you from achieving your objectives. So I'm trying to link it here with the whole idea of strategy that we have been discussing and moving here. But it doesn't just stop there. That's a negative definition in my view, but it's a very apt and appropriate definition. So it's any event or occurrence that stops you from achieving your objective, but at the same time, I would like to add a positive approach to that and say it's also any event or occurrence or that also stops you from exploiting an opportunity or missing an opportunity to help you make your objective and achieve it as well. So I look at the risk from both points of view. One is a positive one and the other one is a negative one. And I think the definition for risk, I believe very strongly that companies should also define and apply a culture in their organizations that missing opportunities is a risk. And as a result, they get in the habit of always identifying the opportunities. So it's not just identifying the threats that could cause risks that would stop you from achieving your objectives, but also identifying the opportunities that help you achieve your objective as well. And you're at risk if you don't identify those opportunities as well. Okay, why is it important? Well, it's in the definition, and that's why I like this definition. It's important because if you don't achieve your objectives, you are going to miss out on satisfying your market and shareholders and stakeholders and your employees and everybody else around you. So it's critical. And who should, so this is why it's important, and it has a specific amount of cost to the business. That cost doesn't have to be just financial. It could be cost in a variety of ways, as you could probably work out from there. Then we come to the whole idea of, okay, well, how do we manage it? Should we be managing it? And this is where we have a dilemma. This is where we have a conundrum, because there are very differing points of view on this at the top level, at the CEO level, at the C-suite level of organizations. There are some cultures and CEOs that say, oh, I don't need a place for risk. Every single person in my organization should own the risks of the functions and the functions that they look after. Right from the bottom of the organization to the top of organization, everyone, as part of doing your own business every day, you are coming across risk, and it is your responsibility to handle those risks in your day-to-day activities as part of your role and responsibility. There are others that say, nah, you can do that, but that could also lead to complacency, to differing levels of risk appetite, to what you have different people in the organization taking risks for different reasons. Even in the same job, you have differing ways of handling risk by the same people. And as a result, we need some central role for risk management, which actually identifies the basics of how do we identify risks, how do we measure them, how do we evaluate them, and how do we manage them on a day-to-day basis, that everybody follows the same procedures. Of course, at one extreme, it says, yes, there should be a function in the middle that says, this is the risk management function of the organization. And the other extreme, it says no, risk should reside with every single employee in the business. And these and somewhere, most of the organizations fall somewhere in that spectrum, in line between the two. So be aware that there are some differences in that. The other thing is, well, okay, what do we do with risk to start with? Well, first of all, we have to identify risk. So one of the things we do in the process of risk management is we need to identify what are the risks. So you could set up, for example, a risk repository in an organization where you actually brain dump all of the risks that you can think of, right from the bottom of the organization up and from the top of the organization down. And I say it both ways, because sometimes you will find that the risks that you identify bottom up do not map onto the ones from the top down, and finding those gaps and so on are very, very important in addressing what is a risk and what is not. Then once you've identified those risks, you need to figure out, well, I can't handle all of them because there will be hundreds of risks or thousands of risks depending on the organization and its complexity and its industry and so on. So how do we identify the risks that really matter to us? How do we identify the risks that could bring the whole organization down? So we have to find a way of evaluating those risks and assessing them. And we evaluate them, generally speaking, to simplify. There are lots of complex ways of evaluating risks and assessing them, but there's basically what is their impact on the organization. We try and figure out in terms of money or qualitatively, but even if it's qualitatively, we need to find a way of quantifying that impact. If it's a qualitative rather than a quantitative one, and also in terms of the probability of that risk taking place, of that action or that event or that occurrence, and it's a matter of both an impact and a value in terms of financial terms, and a probability in terms of occurrence as well. And we then basically line up all the risks in terms of impact and probability and figure out from that. There are multiple methods which we'll talk about in more detail if you're interested in the future in risk management. But there is a way that we tend to somehow take that repository, that whole tank of brain dumping of all of our risk, and finding a way risks in the organization, and finding a way of how do we prioritize them in terms of their impact and in terms of their probability and in terms of their overall effect on the organization. So that is a fairly significant part of identifying and prioritizing the risks that we have in the organization. So once we have identified them, they fit into a number, or we try to fit them into a number of buckets in the organization. If you remember, we said we manage organizations by managing strategy, managing people, managing information, managing operations, managing markets, and managing finance. So from that, what I've just said, you could see there are these 6 different areas. Okay, and as a result, most of our risks will probably fit into one of those areas. So we'll call that, let's call that risk universe. Some people call it a risk universe, some people risk classification. Okay, so the types of risks will fit into one of those. Strategic risks, which include also governance risk. One example I give you on that is Gianni Infantino and the FIFA and the World Cup. I mean, that is you can argue that that is a governance risk, what he has tried to do. And of course, there are so many other risks that have, occurred because of it, whether it's reputational or otherwise. So strategic risks and governance risk are in the same bucket. Then you have financial risks, and you have operational risks, and market risks, and people risk, and information risk, which includes technology in information as well. So so far we have defined basically what is a risk, the extent of it, how do we identify it and evaluate it, and the types of risks we have. So for the purposes of this video, we will stop at this point, and in the next video I will discuss with you further what do we do with what we have in terms of prioritized risks. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have, then please join my channel and give a like to the video, and we'll see you at the next one.